Throughout the past century, every notable financial downturn has adhered to an identical blueprint, not just resembling patterns, but the exact same one. The year 1929 aligned with it. The year 1987 mirrored it. The year 2000 conformed to it. Likewise, 2008 was no exception. This intricate five-phase framework reveals itself months, if not years, prior to the eventual collapse. Wall Street is fully aware of this framework. The Federal Reserve is knowledgeable about it. Wealth managers tending to billionaires are undoubtedly in the loop. Yet, you might not have come across it. If average individuals were clued into the indicators, they would withdraw their investments ahead of the disaster rather than in its aftermath. Today, I will guide you through each of the five stages, illustrating precisely where we currently stand in this timeline. A hint: we are further along than you realize. In 1929, Roger Babson, a man of foresight, delivered a speech at a business conference that earned him immense disdain on Wall Street. He uttered 9 words that would seal his reputation. Sooner or later, a crash is coming, and it may be devastating. The audience erupted in laughter, and newspapers jeered at him. Irving Fisher, the revered economist of that period, openly ridiculed him, asserting that stocks had reached a plateau of permanent highs. Just 47 days later, the market collapsed. Fisher lost everything and passed away in destitution, while Babson prospered, using his wealth to establish a college that continues to thrive today. However, what many fail to understand is that Babson wasn't simply making a hunch. He had devised a systematic approach for evaluating financial landscapes. He examined credit levels, market concentration, institutional behaviors, liquidity conditions, and what he termed trigger vulnerabilities. 5 elements, 5 stages. I dedicated 3 months to scrutinizing historical records, Federal Reserve statistics, and academic research to confirm whether his methodology consistently applied across various crises. It does, without exception. Allow me to demonstrate. The first stage is the credit boom. This is where it always initiates, not with avarice or speculation, but with debt. Each major crash begins with a phase where credit proliferates beyond the economy's capacity to absorb it. Individuals borrow beyond their means, utilizing that borrowed capital to acquire assets. This purchasing surge inflates prices. Increased prices instill a sense of wealth, prompting further borrowing. It's a self-perpetuating loop that mimics prosperity, yet it's actually a trap in the making. In the late 1920s, margin debt surged. Everyday Americans were investing 10% and borrowing 90% for stock purchases. By 1929, total margin debt equaled the entire federal budget. Factory workers were leveraged like hedge fund managers. In 2007, it involved mortgage debts. Financial institutions engineered complex products, permitting individuals to procure homes without any upfront payment. They securitized these mortgages and marketed them to pension funds. The leverage was obscured but omnipresent. In 2000, corporate debt took precedence. Profitless companies borrowed billions to fuel expansion, using stocks as collateral. When stock values declined, the entire framework collapsed. Now, consider our current situation. Official margin debt hovers around $750 billion. But this figure is misleading. It captures only a fraction of the true leverage in the economy. When factoring in securities-based lending, where affluent investors borrow against their portfolios, another $800 billion is added. Incorporating the leverage present in options markets, which allows small amounts of capital to control colossal positions, leads to trillions more in notional exposure. Corporate debt has soared over $10 trillion, predominantly leveraged for stock buybacks rather than business development. Government debt has surpassed $34 trillion, necessitating interest payments greater than the defense budget. As a share of GDP, total debt in the American economy presently exceeds levels recorded in 1929, 2008, and is at its highest in history. Stage 1 isn't merely signaling danger, it's a blaze. The second stage is the concentration trap. Here's a key insight overlooked in finance education. Crashes don't merely occur due to elevated prices. They arise because risks are concentrated. When a limited number of assets hold an outsized portion of the market's value, the system becomes precarious. It only takes one of those assets to falter, dragging everything else down in the process. In 1929, the market was dominated by a select few glamour stocks. Radio Corporation of America was the shining star, skyrocketing from below $2 to over $500 within mere years. People failed to grasp radio technology. They simply recognized the stock continuously rising. RCA constituted a significant portion of the market's valuation. When it faltered, the entire market crumbled alongside it. In 2000, it was the tech boom driven by dot-coms, Cisco, Intel, Microsoft, and a few tech giants. The Nasdaq ultimately became a wager on a select group of 10 companies. When those 10 experienced losses, trillions in wealth evaporated. In 2008, the concentration was obscured within the banking sector. 5 banks held the majority share of derivatives exposure. When Lehman collapsed, it nearly dragged the whole system down with it. Today, the lack of diversification is glaring, and yet there seems to be little concern. The top 7 companies in the S&P 500 now make up over 30% of the index total. At times this year, that figure has approached 35%. Consider the implications of this. When you invest in an S&P 500 index fund, which is a common feature in many 401s and retirement portfolios, you're not truly investing in 500 companies. You're essentially placing a hefty leveraged bet on Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Nvidia, Meta, and Tesla. If those 7 stocks tumble by 50%, your supposedly diversified index fund could decline by 15 to 20%, even if all other stocks remain stable. And here's the catch with those 7 stocks. They all carry valuations that demand perfection. Not just satisfactory earnings, but flawless earnings. Any disappointment, slowdown, or crack in the narrative will trigger a self-perpetuating sell-off. Passive investing has exacerbated this issue. Each dollar flowing into an index fund automatically buys more of the largest stocks, elevating their prices and increasing their weighting, meaning the next dollar goes even further into them. It's a momentum machine that works exquisitely while ascending. When descending, it inverses. Each dollar that flows out sells off the largest positions first. Forced liquidation triggers further declines. This is stage 2, the concentration trap, and we are farther entrenched in it than ever before. Stage 3 is when the smart money vacates. This stage frustrates me the most as it exposes the mechanics behind the game. Preceding every major crash, a period occurs where institutional investors, the banks, hedge funds, family offices, and billionaires, quietly trim their positions. They offload their shares, accumulate cash, and purchase protective measures. They don't publicize this action. They don't issue warnings. In fact, their public communications often proclaim the opposite. They advise staying invested, proclaim the fundamentals are robust, and urge against panic. Meanwhile, they are making their egress. In 1929, the Morgans and Rockefellers began liquidating in the summer, months before the October crash. Bernard Baruch, one of America's richest men, was nearly all in cash by September. Joseph Kennedy sold everything after his fabled conversation with his shoeshine boy. The real reason he sold? He had connections to those aware of the internal bank workings. While regular Americans were purchasing stocks, they were effectively the exit liquidity for the smart money. During 2007, hedge funds began shorting subprime mortgages a full year before the crisis hit. Goldman Sachs memorably bet against the very securities they were peddling to their clients. Executives at Countrywide and other mortgage lenders divested their personal shares while assuring investors that all was well. Regular Americans kept acquiring houses and bank stocks. They were the exit liquidity. Now, turning to today, corporate insider selling has surged to levels not seen in decades. CEOs, CFOs, board members, those who truly know the intricacies of these companies, are selling their stock at an unprecedented rate. The ratio of insider sales to insider purchases is at extreme highs. For every insider acquiring shares of their company, multiple insiders are selling. In contrast, retail investors, ordinary individuals, have been pouring money into the market. Robinhood accounts, 401k contributions, passive index flows, record amounts abound. The smart money is liquidating. The everyday folks are buying. This isn't mere coincidence. This is the established pattern. This is how it unfolds time and time again. Stage 3 is flashing warnings. Stage 4 embodies the liquidity illusion. This is the most duplicitous stage as everything appears normal. Prices remain steady or even advance. Trading volumes are robust. Nothing seems amiss. However, beneath the surface, the liquidity propping up the market is seeping away. Liquidity acts like oxygen within financial markets. When it's abundant, everything operates seamlessly. Transactions between buyers and sellers occur effortlessly. Prices adjust smoothly and shocks are absorbed. When liquidity vanishes, markets cease to function properly. Prices don't adjust gradually, they leap. Small sell orders can drastically shift prices. Feedback loops begin to dominate. The crash feeds off itself. In 1928 and 1929, the Federal Reserve increased interest rates and tightened monetary conditions. They aimed to temper speculation. What they effectively did was siphon off the liquidity that propped up asset prices. For a time, nothing changed. When the market even continued to rise, people assumed the Fed's tightening was inconsequential. Then October arrived, and when selling commenced, there was no one left to buy. The bids just disappeared. Stocks didn't just dip, they plummeted headlong because there was absolutely no liquidity. In 2007 and 2008, a similar scenario unfolded. The Fed had been escalating rates, credit conditions were constricting, but the stock market remained elevated. Housing prices were still robust. Everything appeared to be well. Then Bear Stearns failed, then Lehman. Suddenly, everyone grasped that the liquidity had vanished. The market plummeted by 50% within months. Now consider the current situation. The Federal Reserve has lifted interest rates at the swiftest pace seen in 40 years. They've surged from 0 to over 5% in under 2 years. They've been executing quantitative tightening, extracting hundreds of billions of dollars from the financial system. Yet, the stock market stands near record highs. People believe this implies that the tightening is irrelevant. They think we've achieved a soft landing. They are mistaken. The strain is already becoming evident. In March 2023, three significant banks collapsed in 1 week: Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and First Republic. These were not minor entities. They failed due to a liquidity crisis triggered by rising rates. The Fed had to intervene with emergency lending programs. They essentially printed money to support the banking system, while asserting they weren't conducting a bailout. Such emergency measures are short-term fixes. They don't rectify the fundamental issue. The Treasury market, the bedrock of the global financial system, has shown signs of distress. There have been instances where liquidity in the Treasury market nearly vanished. The most liquid market globally is experiencing operational issues. This is stage 4, the liquidity illusion. Everything appears tranquil on the surface. Beneath, the oxygen is being drained from the environment. That introduces us to stage 5, the trigger. This is the element that nobody can foresee, and that's what renders it so perilous. Stage 5 is the event that shifts a susceptible market into a nosedive. It's the spark that ignites the fuse. Here's where most people misjudge triggers. They believe the trigger initiates the crash. It doesn't. The crash is driven by stages 1 through 4, the debt, the concentration, the smart money exit, and the liquidity depletion. Those create the environment for collapse. The trigger merely decides the timing. In 1929, the trigger was the Hatry case. Clarence Hatry was a British financier arrested for fraud in September. No one in America cared. It seemed inconsequential. But British banks had exposure to Hatry. They needed to generate cash, so they divested their American holdings. That selling incited further selling. Within weeks, the market was in freefall. A minor British fraud case instigated the Great Depression. Not because the fraud was significant, but because the system was so delicate that any shock could have caused it. In 2008, the trigger was Lehman Brothers. Yet it could have been Bear Stearns or AIG or any number of other entities. The system was on the brink of collapse. Lehman was simply the ignition. So, what will the trigger be this time? I don't know. No one knows. That's the essence of triggers. It could be geopolitical, a genuine escalation in Taiwan, something unforeseen in the Middle East, or a miscalculation involving Russia. It could involve finance, a major hedge fund collapsing, a sovereign debt crisis in Europe or Asia, or a derivatives mishap. And keep in mind, the derivatives market is over $600 trillion in notional value. A single major counterparty failure could reverberate throughout the entire system. It could relate to the banking system, more regional banks collapsing, a run on a significant institution, or a commercial real estate crisis that impacts the lenders who financed it. It could be political, a constitutional crisis, a debt ceiling standoff gone awry, or a loss of faith in the dollar. Or it could involve something no one is discussing. That's typically how it turns out. The trigger is seldom the issue everyone is apprehensive about. It's the one that catches everyone off guard. What I do understand is this. When stages 1 through 4 are all signaling red, the trigger usually appears within 12 to 24 months. Since late 2024, we've confirmed 4 phases. This places the time frame in 2025 or 2026. Now, let's clarify what this doesn't imply. I'm not suggesting that the market will crash tomorrow. Timing is unpredictable. Markets can remain irrational longer than you can remain financially stable. Anyone claiming they know the exact moment a crash will occur is not being truthful. I'm also not advising you to liquidate everything and retreat into a bunker. That's not a strategy. That's sheer panic. What I am conveying is that the conditions which have preceded every significant crash in the past century are currently present. All 5 phases are either active or on the horizon. This isn't typical. This is not a rehearsal. The inquiry isn't about whether you trust me. It's about what actions you will take with this knowledge. Roger Babson didn't merely forecast the 1929 crash. He readied himself for it. While others were leveraged to the max, he held onto cash. While everyone else was purchasing stocks at their peak, he invested in farmland and tangible assets. When the downturn hit, he was equipped to endure and prosper. Irving Fisher, the brilliant economist who ridiculed Babson, lost everything. His wealth, his reputation, his legacy. He spent the remainder of his life attempting to recover and never succeeded. The distinction between them wasn't intellect. Fisher was probably more intelligent. The difference was that Babson heeded the signals. He acknowledged the trend. He positioned himself for what was forthcoming instead of what he hoped would happen. You face the same choice right now. You can review the information I just presented and determine it doesn't apply to you. Markets always rebound eventually, right? This instance might be different. Or you can pose some tough questions to yourself. How much of your wealth is currently in the stock market? Not only your brokerage account, but also your retirement accounts, your pension if applicable, and your home equity if you reside in an inflated market. How much of that is tied up in a few mega-cap tech stocks? How much of your financial stability hinges on prices remaining stable or increasing? If the market plummeted 50% in the next 18 months, as it did in 2008, would you be all right? Would you jeopardize your retirement? Would you have to postpone your plans by a decade? I'm not directing you on what to do. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a historian. I examine trends. And the trend is evident. Those who suffer in crashes aren't foolish. They're just unready. They place their trust in the professionals who assure them that everything is fine. They believe the system is more secure than it truly is. They assume someone would alert them if something significant was wrong. No one warned them in 1929. No one warned them in 2008. No one will alert you now. The omen is the trend itself, and now you are aware. What you do next is your decision. If this video opened your eyes to something you hadn't recognized before, consider subscribing and activating notifications. I will be detailing each of these 5 phases in greater depth in the upcoming weeks, including the specific data points you can monitor yourself. Knowledge isn't power. Applied knowledge is power. The collapse of 1929 didn't have to devastate so many lives. The signs were present. The patterns were distinct. People opted not to see it. Don't make the same choice.